are we about ready to get started?
I believe the prosecution side is ready, Your Honor.
Okay.
I believe defense is ready as well.
Okay, then I assume videos will start turning on. Okay. All right, so let's see, after everybody's got their videos turned on. And okay, who are my bailiffs? All right. All right, so let's see, the way you guys have yourself, just looking at the names so I can tell everybody apart. So I've got an FS bailiff, so defense, okay. And can the bailiffs introduce themselves?
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. Let's have the prosecution bailiff first.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Hong Ann Lee, and I will be bailiffing for our
All
prosecution.
right. Thank you. And let's defense.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Maddie Ondo, and I'm bailiffing for the defense.
All right. And you guys are presumably aware of how you need to keep time and everything, right? And what is the method that you guys are using to notify folks of the time? Are you holding up something in the video?
We will be typing the remaining time in chat.
In the chat. So I need to make sure I've got my chat open and off to the side. Okay, that helps me. All right. And both sides are ready. So give me 1 second here. Actually, you know what? Everybody give me a moment. I'm going to change my setup because I'm realizing I can't do this on one screen. So 1 second, hold on. Okay, thanks for everybody's patience. I really appreciate it. Okay. So I am Judge Padula, and I believe both sides have indicated that they are ready to go. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor, the prosecution is ready.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Hold on, I just had a technical issue. There it goes. Okay. Sorry about all the technical issues. All right. So why don't I have the teams introduce themselves?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Amy Gretsch. I am a lawyer today representing the state in the case of the state of Washington v. Tracy Whitney. My co-counsel will now introduce themselves.
Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Katie Loughran, and I'm a lawyer representing the state today.
Okay.
Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Isabel Souza, and I'm an attorney representing the state today. Our witnesses will now introduce themselves in order of appearance, and they do all use she, her pronouns.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Amy Kunz, and today I will be Wesley Everett.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Mary Jose Ortega, and today I will be Meryl Grimm.
Good evening. My name is Megan Biock, and today I will be Del Hubbard.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Eileen Ballard, and today I will be Detective Jaden Brandberg.
Okay. And how about defense, please?
Yes, good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury and opposing counsel. My name is Ryan Morrell, and I'm an attorney representing Tracy Whitney in today's case.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Priya Kara.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Kanay Yod. I'm a defense attorney. The witnesses will now introduce themselves in order of appearance.
Good evening. My name is Sky Levy Davidson, but today we'll be playing A. Lynn Strong.
Good evening. My name is Marcus Sanchez, and today I'll be playing Britt Smithson.
Good evening. My name is Owen Odegaard, and I'll be playing Robin Hess.
Good evening. My name is Ian Chung, but today I will be playing the defendant, Tracy Whitney.
Okay, welcome to everybody. All right. Do we have any preliminary matters before we get to the pretrial motion?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to request that we take a brief 5-minute recess in between the prosecution side and the defense side, the witnesses, I mean.
Okay. And is there any objection to that?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Anything else other than a break?
The defense has a motion to offer prosecution. Today we'll be using Zoom's screen share feature to display exhibits for the jury and for witnesses, but these exhibits will be displayed before they have been admitted into evidence. So we ask that the jury be instructed not to consider them until they have been admitted.
All right. Any objection to this?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. With that, I believe we should have the bailiff call the court to order, please.
The court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Padula now presiding. Your Honor, our case today is State of Washington v. Tracy Whitney.
Okay. Members of the jury, is there any reason to believe that there may be a potential conflict of interest that could call into question your ability to rate this trial impartially? Is there any issues? Okay. All right, so video and audio recordings are not allowed without the express permission of both teams. If anyone plans to record any part of the trial, they should speak up now and ask for permission. Okay, and I will remind everybody that there is to be no communication between any spectator and a competitor until the end of the trial. This includes during recess. All right, no questions about that. Okay. How about any pretrial motions?
Your Honor, the defense has a motion to present.
Okay, please proceed.
Your Honor, today's case focuses on the alleged assault of a groundskeeper during a demonstration on September 16th, 2019, protesting a historical statue in Barryton, Washington. The assailant, Wesley Everett, was part of the Barryton chapter of an organization called Debunking Mystery that works to remove statues in public places. My client, the defendant Tracy Whitney, heads Debunking Mystery as a whole, which has 100 affiliates worldwide. Mr. Britt Smithson heads the Barryton chapter of the organization. The defense moves to exclude all evidence of all alleged statements made by Mr. Smithson during a video conference call on August 22nd, 2019, that included Mr. Whitney, Mr. Smithson, and the assailant, Wesley Everett, among others. Those statements by Smithson are inadmissible hearsay under Rules 801 and 802. We anticipate the prosecution will contend that Smithson's statements are admissible against Whitney as either adoptive admissions or co-conspirator statements. First, Mr. Smithson's statements are not adoptive admissions by Whitney. Whitney did not manifest an adoption or belief in the truth of Smithson's statements. Under State v. Neslin, there are two ways a party opponent can manifest the adoption of a statement: in either words and gestures, or, under certain circumstances, complete silence. Manifesting adoption by words means acquiescing or accepting a declarant's statements. At trial today, Ms. Everett will testify that after Smithson concluded speaking, Whitney said, "Thanks for that report, Britt. Very interesting." That statement is clipped, and immediately thereafter, Whitney thanks Smithson and moves them right along to the next agenda item. Under State v. Hill, that statement is a deflection, not acquiescence. Likewise, Whitney's silence does not constitute adoption. Under Hill, the prosecution must show three things: that the defendant heard the statements, he was able to respond, and it's reasonable to conclude he would have responded had there been no intention to acquiesce. Prosecution cannot show this third prong because my client had no obligation to respond. Under State v. McCaughey, a defendant does not have to respond to a declarant's statements unless obligated to do so. Since Smithson's statements didn't accuse Whitney of a crime or blame him for committing one, there was no obligation for Whitney to respond.
Ms. Kara, my understanding of the facts are that Britt Smithson is referring to an event that I believe took place in Australia and said something to the effect of, "That's what we need here." Is it your contention that that's not a provocative enough statement that a response would have been appropriate?
Your Honor, Britt Smithson's statements was directed to everybody in that video conference that day. And under cases such as State v. Neslin, those statements need to be incriminating in character of the defendant. As in State v. Neslin, the defendant was charged because her statements were ruled as adopted admissions since she didn't respond to statements that were incriminating of her. But in this case, Britt Smithson's statements were broad and they were directed to everybody, not just Whitney. Therefore, there was no obligation for him to respond as they weren't incriminating of him.
Do you think it then is just coincidence that allegedly the same type of behavior that took place in Australia is also taking place as the underlying facts of these charges?
Perhaps, but though the behavior that Britt Smithson was outlining in his pep talk to the group was carried out by Wesley Everett, where in this case, it's the issue that's pertaining to today is proving Whitney's involvement in this alleged conspiracy, not Everett. So it's the contents of his talk are necessarily, they don't go to show Whitney's involvement in a conspiracy.
And I think I interrupted you when you had about a minute and a half left. Please go ahead and complete your argument.
Yes, Your Honor. Finally, Britt Smithson's statements are not admissible under the co-conspirator rule, or 801D2E. The prosecution needs to prove the existence of a conspiracy by a preponderance. That is their burden. It's higher than any other subpart of 801D. Under Anderson and Miller, the state must make a prima facie showing of a conspiracy. Show that the conspiracy existed when the statements were made. Show that those statements were made in furtherance of that conspiracy. And finally, show that the declarant, Smithson, and the defendant, Whitney, were engaged in that alleged conspiracy. The state cannot point to any independent evidence of Smithson's statements to show his involvement. Therefore, the state is bootstrapping here, and the co-conspirator rule does not apply.
Okay.
For these reasons, we ask the court to grant our motion to exclude all evidence of all alleged statements made by Mr. Smithson during the August 22nd video conference. Thank you.
Ms. Kara, this is just a housekeeping matter. I caught your last name and a Morel. Who was your third attorney? I didn't catch the name.
Our third attorney is Ms. Yad, Kine Yad.
Yad. And how do I spell Yad?
It would be Yade.
Thank you for assistance on that.
Yes.
Okay. Prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution asks that you deny the defense's motion and instead allow the inclusion of all evidence of statements made by Britt Smithson on August 22nd, 2019, during a video conference with the defendant, Wesley Everett, and other members of Debunking Mystery. Evidence of such statements should be admitted as hearsay exceptions pursuant to Evidence Rules 801 and 802. First, Evidence Rule 801 D2E stipulates that out-of-court statements used for the truth of the matter are admissible if they are a statement by a co-conspirator of a party during the course and in furtherance of the conspiracy. Smithson fulfills that role of co-conspirator to the defendant, and his words and actions further the conspiracy, making his statements admissible as a hearsay exception. To prove that Smithson is a co-conspirator, there must be clear evidence, independent of any statements made regarding the August 22nd DMIT meeting. Your Honor, there is such evidence. The defendant specifically identifies Smithson as his point person in Barryton and establishes that he is comfortable allowing Britt to do the talking for him. Additionally, Wesley Everett's testimony clearly identifies Smithson as a primary and lead member of the DMIT organization's inner circle, alongside the defendant. Smithson served as an agent between the defendant and Everett, passing along information from the defendant, including key intel prior to the September 16th protest. Smithson had access to inside planning and knowledge, such as the defendant's personal contact information, which he provided Everett with. The underlying violent messages indicated in coded language used by DMIT and described in the detective statement, as well as the use of the private messaging system between Smithson and Whitney, which destroyed any evidence of sent messages after 10 minutes, is further evidence of this conspiracy. Second, we must prove that the statements made by the co-conspirator Britt Smithson were in furtherance of the conspiracy. During the forenamed August 2019 video conference, Smithson made a lengthy statement praising a DMIT protest in Australia where violent methods were employed and a security guard severely injured. Britt urged members to shove interlopers before specifically asking if Everett was, quote, ready to go. This case involves the injury of Del Hubbard, a groundskeeper for the Alton Berry statue, in much the same way that the Australian groundskeeper was injured. As a co-conspirator, Smithson's statements demonstrate his collaborative role with the defendant in orchestrating this protest and the events that ensued, thus furthering the conspiracy.
Ms. Souza, the problem that I'm having here is, I guess, what are the, in your mind, what do you need to show a conspiracy? What's the definition of conspiracy?
I would believe that would be evidence of a planning of a criminal action, which, as you can see, there was clear evidence of violent methods being encouraged through the use of the coded language, which is brought forth in the testimony of the detective.
So we need an agreement between at least two people and a criminal and planning of a criminal activity. Up to this point, every single protest had been peaceful. So where's the crime that had been agreed to? In other words, what was the gap again? Remind me the gap between that meeting and the events that are the basis of this charge. It's at least, I think, a couple weeks, right?
Yes, Your Honor. The meeting was clearly meant to, or in the weeks prior to the protest, both Smithson and Whitney had been involved in helping prep Wesley Everett for his actions in this protest, and through the use of the coded language and then that chat that they used that would delete their incriminating messages, all of this does prove that there was a conspiracy or that there was a form of collusion to commit these actions prior to the event.
Thank you for that. I think I interrupted you with about a minute left. Please continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Finally, there is a second reason that prosecution believes that the evidence of these video conference statements should be admissible per the aforementioned evidence rules 801 and 802. Tracy Whitney adopted and endorsed Smithson's views through both silence and affirmation, qualifying the statements for admission under the party opponent hearsay exception. Smithson claims Whitney, quote, did not interrupt or correct me and was, quote, listening attentively during his statements. Whitney did not say a word in opposition to Smithson and even affirmed the statements with thanks, describing them as interesting, which clears the bar set in the precedents of State versus Redwine for an acquiescence. The defendant's clear attentiveness and subsequent silence in the course of Smithson's statements qualifies this and all evidence pertaining to the statement for adoptive admission. For these reasons, and for its importance in today's case, the prosecution asks that you allow for the inclusion of all evidence of the statements made by Britt Smithson on or about August 22nd, 2019. Thank you.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. While listening to prosecution's speech, there was a couple things I caught that I wanted to address. First, when needing to find a prima facie showing of a conspiracy under cases such as State v. Anderson, there must also be a substantial step. And while listening to prosecution's speech, that's not something I heard. And that needs to be established in order to show a prima facie showing of a conspiracy. Also, opposing counsel mentioned Smithson's statements of, "Are you ready to go, Everett?" and him reaching out to Everett. Today's pretrial motion is establishing an alleged conspiracy with Whitney and Smithson, not with Everett. Whatever statements directed to induce Everett's participation in an alleged conspiracy are not relevant in this motion today. Therefore, any mention of those statements trying to induce Everett's participation don't further their argument in any way. Also, in terms of their reasoning for the co-conspirator exception, there was a lot about whether or not Britt Smithson was a speaking agent, and any evidence using to support that does not support any arguments towards whether or not Britt Smithson was a co-conspirator. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sir, rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. There is more than sufficient evidence, independent of any statements made regarding the August 2019 meeting, to establish the existence of a conspiracy and to prove that Smithson fulfilled the role of co-conspirator. Britt's words and actions on numerous occasions demonstrate a solid relationship and history of communication and planning between Smithson and Whitney, especially in the weeks leading up to the protest. Use of private messaging systems, which destroyed evidence, as I mentioned, as well as the simultaneous yet supposedly accidental destruction of both Smithson and Whitney's computer systems shortly after the protest provides sufficient evidence of this conspiracy and collaboration between these two persons. Additionally, Your Honor, the defense's argument that Whitney did not acquiesce to Smithson's statements ignores the facts of the case. Whitney's remarks after Smithson's statements were not a deflection, and Whitney does not immediately change the topic of conversation after Smithson finishes her remarks. So if Whitney was inclined to move the conversation along immediately, he would have not replied to Smithson's remarks or described them as interesting and affirmed them with a thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, I appreciate it. I'm concerned with the gap between this meeting and when the events took place. I'm concerned with the remoteness of Whitney, that Smithson and Wesley Everett could have certainly had conversations between this meeting and the next one. And this idea of interesting, I mean, if I said to you, hey, that Mexican restaurant up the street is awesome, we should have lunch there, and you said interesting, I don't know that I'd be waiting for you to arrive at the restaurant. I wouldn't have any idea if you were going to be arriving at the restaurant or not. I think something else needed to happen. I'm going to exclude those statements, and I will counsel both attorneys or both teams to make sure that your witnesses are aware that those are excluded. Okay. And are we then ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And the prosecution, of course, will be starting.
Yes.
So would you like to make your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, may it please the court. Today, you will hear the story of a leader who was unwilling to assume the responsibility for manipulating and inciting a member of his organization to commit an act of vandalism which resulted in a government worker's injuries. Therefore, the defendant is attempting to avoid any consequences by trying to disassociate with this individual, thus denying his part in fabricating a complex criminal conspiracy. Accountability is essential when dealing with situations such as the one we face today, because when leaders don't face consequences for their actions, it allows them to continue to manipulate more individuals, while the impressionable people they target take the fall for everything. On September 16, 2019, Wesley Everett attended a debunking mystery protest where she vandalized the Alton Berry statue and then injured Del Hubbard, a municipal facilities worker. Before this incident happened, Miss Everett was indoctrinated into the organization Debunking Mystery, led by Tracy Whitney, and subsequently became his puppet. On the surface, Debunking Mystery is a historical group that protests against statues with potentially harmful pasts. But behind the facade of this organization is Tracy Whitney, a leader who is eager to get what he wants by any means necessary. Tracy Whitney and Barrington's local chapter leader of Debunking Mystery, Britt Smithson, manipulated Miss Everett into committing the act of vandalism against the statue, while repeatedly indicating to her to take any means necessary to do so. Throughout the time Miss Everett was a part of Debunking Mystery, Tracy Whitney expressed a lack of care for the safety of others and ill will towards those who disagreed with his ideas through veiled posts on the organization's website and through the use of code words within communications with Miss Everett. These events were not caused by a single individual, but rather was an intricate plot puppeteered by Tracy Whitney to destroy the statue. As a representative of the state of Washington, we have charged Tracy Whitney with malicious mischief in the first degree, criminal conspiracy, and assault in the second degree. Today, the prosecution will call 4 witnesses. First, you will hear from Wesley Everett, an impressionable and lonely individual who sought to be a part of something, but ended up being manipulated by the leaders of the organization she joined, Tracy Whitney and Britt Smithson, to commit an act of vandalism which resulted in the injury of Del Hubbard. Miss Everett takes responsibility for her actions, but fears that if Tracy Whitney doesn't take responsibility as well, an incident like the one we're discussing today will happen again in the future. Next, you will hear from Mayor Grimm, who interacted with members of Debunking Mystery. These members forcefully advocated for the destruction of the Alton Berry statue. She also received threatening correspondences from members of the organization, indicating actions that would be taken upon the statue if she didn't comply with their demands. Then you'll hear from Del Hubbard, who is the individual that was assaulted at the Debunking Mystery protest that took place on September 16th. Finally, you will hear from Detective Jaden Brandberg, who will provide valuable insight and analysis into the true nature of Debunking Mystery by deciphering coded language within the organization's documents and correspondences between members. Now, the defense will call their own witnesses today, and they will tell their own story, but it will not be a complete and clear look at all the facts. It's important to remember that the prosecution's case against Tracy Whitney is going to be built on solid evidence and is not based on the testimony of the defendant and his accomplice, who are trying to avoid the consequences of their crimes. By the end of this trial, the state is confident that the evidence will show, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant committed these crimes of malicious mischief in the first degree, criminal conspiracy, and assault in the second degree. And my co-counsel will stand up here today and ask that you find the defendant guilty of all charges. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are here because Tracy Whitney, founder of the organization known as Debunking Mystery, is being blamed and charged for the actions of a single member of his organization. In the summer of 2019, the organization Debunking Mystery, or DMIT for short, held a handful of protests and meetings regarding a statue of Alton Berry in front of the Barrington City Hall. Calling for its removal and demanding action, the Barrington DMIT chapter attended town hall meetings, sent letters to the mayor, and held protests. All of these actions were taken peacefully and legally until September 16th of 2019, where a protest regarding the statue turned violent and dangerous. After several lively speeches, Wesley Everett, a member of the Barryton DMIT chapter, took a sledgehammer and hit the statue several times, breaking off its arm. He then lost his balance and accidentally hit the groundskeeper, Del Hubbard, severely injuring him. Now, Everett claims this was a planned effort by the DMIT organization, planned by what he calls the inner circle of his local DMIT chapter. He claims that Tracy Whitney, along with the other inner circle members, planned this attack and put him up to his crimes. But the evidence that we will present today will show that Everett acted alone and that Tracy Whitney had no knowledge that Wesley Everett wanted to attack the statue, because Wesley Everett went rogue. Not only was Whitney thousands of miles away that day, the testimony will show that he is in no way responsible for the actions of Wesley Everett. It was the head of the local DMIT chapter, Britt Smithson, who planned these Barryton protests, but when Wesley Everett went rogue, he was the one who turned them violent. An eyewitness and reporter for the Barryton Standard, A. Lynn Strong, will testify that everyone at the protests, including Britt Smithson, who had planned them, was shocked by Everett's actions. Britt Smithson himself will also tell you that this so-called inner circle that supposedly planned these violent and criminal actions never existed in the first place. You will also hear from law professor Robin Hess, who will testify about the statements made by Tracy Whitney. He'll show how the First Amendment protects my client's speeches, emails, and texts. But listen closely to Tracy Whitney's statements, and remember that if there is no imminence, there can be no conspiracy. Finally, you'll hear from the defendant himself, Tracy Whitney, who will show how he wasn't involved in any part of the planning, protesting, or crimes of Wesley Everett. Now, the prosecution will try to tell you that Tracy Whitney supported and incited these actions, but when investigations began, keep in mind that the lead detective for the prosecution relied exclusively upon the statements of Wesley Everett. And the so-called valuable testimony that he will provide today is coming from the Wesley Everett who has a plea deal riding on his testimony today. Now, as to the supposed code phrases that the prosecution mentioned, evidence today will show that these are nothing more than inside jokes made to mock the founder of DMIT, Tracy Whitney. Now, in today's case, the defense does not have the burden of proof. By contrast, the state has the burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Tracy Whitney is guilty. But I ask you to look for yourself. Look closely at the state's case, and you will see all the reasons for doubt. You will see that Wesley Everett went rogue, and you will see that Wesley Everett is only hoping to lessen the sentence for his own crimes. And that is why at the end of today's proceedings, my co-counsel, Kine Yad, will ask you to return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. And are the parties ready to present witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Let's move forward with the prosecution's first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Wesley Everett to the stand.
All right. Now, before we get started, I will swear all the witnesses in to save time. So if everybody could turn on their video so I can swear everybody in. All right. Will all of you raise your right hand, please? Do each of you swear or affirm that the testimony you provide this evening will be the truth, the whole truth, under penalty of perjury and laws of the state of Washington?
I do.
Okay. Everybody has indicated that they will. All right. So your witness is under oath. Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
My name is Wesley Everett. That's spelled E-V-E-R-E-T-T.
And can you explain to us what brings you to court today?
Yes, I was a member of Debunking Mystery, or DMIT for short, which was led by Tracy Whitney, who's the defendant today. I am also currently facing charges of my own. I pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment, telephone harassment, and malicious mischief.
Let's talk about how you got to this point. How did you first get involved with this organization?
Well, when I moved out to Barryton about 4 to 5 years ago, I found DMIT through an app called Meet Me. I'm a big history buff, so I was immediately interested by it.
And did you meet new people through this group?
Yeah, I met Britt Smithson, the leader of the local chapter, and we became fast friends. Not long after, Britt invited me to join the inner circle, which was a pretty big deal if you ask me, moving up so quick and all. Later, Britt introduced me to Tracy Whitney, the leader of DMIT.
And did you ever communicate with Tracy Whitney?
Yes, both over email and, upon Tracy's insistence, an app that encrypted and deleted all messages after 10 minutes.
Let's talk about these DMIT meetings. What kind of statues were targeted?
A lot of different ones, but the most important being the Alton Berry statue chosen in April of 2019. From the start, the goal was to remove it.
And how did you go about trying to achieve this goal?
The first steps included sending a manifesto, a demand letter provided by Tracy, and a lot of somewhat threatening messages to the City Council and Mayor Grimm. Later on, there were 4 public demonstrations, of which I only attended the last on September 16th.
Can you elaborate on the threatening messages to Mayor Grimm that you mentioned?
Yeah, we were tasked with pestering Mayor Grimm with phone calls, emails, and texts to make sure we weren't being ignored. I ended up sending the majority of these messages and covering my tracks with methods that Tracy had taught me.
Thank you. Your Honor, permission to show Exhibit 5 on the screen for the witness's identification.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
And Your Honor, could I get confirmation that you can see Exhibit number 5?
I can. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Miss Everett, let's focus. Miss Everett, can you please, this document has been marked for identification as Exhibit number 5. Would you please identify what this document is?
Yes, those are some of the conversations Tracy and I had on an encrypted app.
And can you tell us a little bit about this correspondence?
Yes, my messages are on the left and Tracy's messages are on the right.
And is this a true and accurate copy of the conversation you and Tracy had?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we ask that Exhibit 5 be moved into evidence.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Okay, so admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Miss Everett, let's focus on the correspondence of September 15th. Would you read this conversation to us, please?
Yes. First, Tracy says, ready to bring the hammer down tomorrow, which I replied with, born ready. To which Tracy says, great, just make sure it's right, then wow them with your words. I'll be listening, you should too. I replied saying, see you then, say the words, E.T., E.T., E.T.
And can you tell us what you meant when you said, see you then, say the words, E.T., E.T., E.T.?
I meant an energetic tango, which is a terminology agreed upon by Tracy and the inner circle as a call for direct action for force to be used against the statue.
Thank you. Your Honor, permission to stop showing Exhibit number 5 on the screen?
Of course, if you're finished with it.
Thank you. Let's talk about the final protest on September 16th, 2019. What was the goal of this protest?
The goal on that day was to remove the statue through whatever means necessary.
And walk me through what your assigned job was during the protest.
Yeah, I was assigned by Britt to take a leading role in giving speeches, managing crowd manipulation, and managing a live stream so Tracy could see and give words of encouragement to our group.
And did Tracy Whitney say anything through the live stream during the protest?
Yes, Tracy said quotes from the website like, we must never surrender and now is the time for direct action. Near the end of the rally, when tensions were especially high, Tracy screamed energetic tango, which was our call to action, as I previously established.
And what happened after this call to action occurred?
Britt slapped me on the shoulder and encouraged me to go up onto the statue. So, following orders, I jumped up onto it. Not my proudest moment. After I was on the statue, Britt handed me a sledgehammer, and I took it.
And after you obtained the hammer, what happened?
I swung it at the statue's chest and shoulder 3 times, and the 3rd time I ended up hitting Miss Hubbard, which is something I will forever be sorry for.
I can understand that. But were you prepared for this type of situation by DMIT?
Yes, I was. Throughout meetings and messages, it was made clear that direct action needed to be taken in order to achieve the goals set by DMIT. Whitney even told me in our messages, you gotta do what you gotta do. And I listened.
Thank you for your honesty. Your Honor, no further questions.
Thank you. Any cross?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Hello, Ms. Everett. You've been a member of DMIT since 2018, haven't you?
Yes, that is correct.
And during this time, you've met many people.
Yes, that is correct.
And one of these people was Britt Smithson.
Yes, that is correct.
And you've been friends with Britt Smithson since you first joined DMIT, haven't you?
Yes.
And I'd like to move on to the day of the protest. Ms. Everett, you mentioned that Tracy Whitney used the phrase energetic tango.
Yes, that is correct. As I previously established, that was our call to action to use direct action against the statue.
Exactly. It was your call to action. It's why you attacked the statue.
Yes.
But you also know that Mr. Whitney hates the phrase energetic tango, don't you?
I'm sorry, Mr. Whitney never said anywhere that he hates the phrase. He just said not to say it in public chats, but it was allowed in private chats, and it was mentioned often in private chats.
So this was a phrase that you and Whitney mentioned often in private chats.
Mentioned it in private chats, and it can be seen in our private chats that were shown today.
No, Ms. Whitney, before you came to court today, you gave a statement.
I did.
This was a statement under oath.
Yes, it was.
Now, a statement under oath means that you tell the truth.
Yes, that is correct.
A statement under oath means that you leave out no material facts.
Yes, that is correct. And I have not left out any material facts.
Now, if I was to show you Your Honor, may I display a copy of the witness's sworn statement?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Please do.
Give me 1 second while I get that ready. All right, Ms. Everett, tell me when you can see this.
I'm sorry, I can't see your screen. There it is. I see it now.
All right, now this is a clear and accurate representation of your statement, is it not?
Yes, that is correct.
And you also have a copy of this statement by you, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Now, you don't mention anywhere in this statement that you and Tracy Whitney use the statement energetic tango consistently in private conversations, do you?
I'm sorry, not in my witness statement. However, you can see that I did mention energetic tango or ET in our private chats.
Now, these private chats would be in Exhibit 5, would they not?
Yes, that is correct. The statement used is ET, ET, ET. I say it 3 times.
But Tracy Whitney never uses this statement, does he?
I'm sorry, what?
But Tracy Whitney never uses this statement, does he?
No, he does not.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Prosecution, this witness can be excused? All right. We'll excuse this witness. Next witness, please.
Your Honor, the state calls Mayor Merrill Grimm to the stand.
And you are under oath. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, Miss Grimm. Would you state your full name and spell it for the record, please?
My full name is Meryl Grimm. It's spelled Grimm.
And what do you do for a living?
I've been the mayor of Barryton for 8 years.
Now let's focus on your position as mayor. When you first ran for mayor, what was your campaign focus?
We had a movement to refurbish public spaces because we wanted to renew pride in our community.
And how are these refurbishments going to be funded?
There was a local sale tax implemented to repay a bond that was passed in 2017. The money was going to be spent for various projects around the city, such as a small portion of the money that went to refurbishing the Altonberry statue and the landscaping around the city hall.
And when did this refurbishment of the Altonberry statue end?
The refurbishment was finished in early spring of 2019.
And did this refurbishment lead to any public controversy?
Yes, In the beginning, it came from no more than 2 or 3 people, including Britt Smithson, who showed up at every city council meeting, even long after the money had been spent and the statue refurbished. They would spend around 6 to 10 minutes during the public comment period complaining about the expenditure.
And what happened about a month after the restoration?
The complaints about the expenses of the refurbishment suddenly began to focus on Altenberry as a person.
And when were you first made aware of the conflict regarding Altenberry's character?
It was at a meeting requested by Britt Smithson in April 2019.
And did anything notable happen at this meeting?
Yes, I was given a letter from Britt Smithson that was written by Tracy Whitney.
Your Honor, permission to show Exhibit 6 on the screen for witness identification?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
You may.
Your Honor, may you please confirm if you can see the exhibit up on the screen?
We can.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Grimm, this document has been marked for identification as exhibit number 6. Would you identify it, please?
Yes, it is a letter written to me by Tracy Whitney, the president of the Debunking Mystery.
And when was this letter written?
It's dated April 2019.
And who's the author of this letter?
Tracy Whitney.
Is this a true and accurate copy?
Yes.
Your Honor, Your Honor, at this time, we ask that Exhibit 6 be moved into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Yes, it is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, how familiar were you with Tracy Whitney prior to receiving this letter?
I had never heard of Tracy Whitney before then.
And what was your impression about this correspondence from Tracy Whitney?
It seemed very demanding. I also felt threatened when I read the lines that said I could avoid unpleasant consequences for Barryton, its facilities, and its employees if I promptly removed and destroyed the statue. I felt it was obviously implying that something bad was going to happen if I didn't comply.
And did you receive any other correspondences from the other members of Debunking Mystery?
Yes, I did. Throughout the summer, I received emails from multiple members that continue to grow more and more threatening, including the wanted poster I was sent.
And did you do anything with the emails you received?
I immediately turned them in to Detective Bramberg to investigate any possible criminal activity.
Your Honor, I'm going to stop sharing the exhibit now.
Okay.
Now let's focus on the protests that occurred over the summer in 2019. Did you attend any of these demonstrations?
Yes, I attended the 4th one in August 2019.
And what did you notice about this protest?
The people gathered there were like robots. They kept reciting the same things over and over again. I didn't go to any more of the protests, because there was no way to resolve the issue with all of the commotion that was happening.
Now let's talk about the final protest that occurred on September 16th. Did anything notable occur at this final protest?
Yes, the city council rejected the Debunking Mysteries proposal to remove and destroy the statue. All of the Debunking Mysteries people stormed out, with several of them broadcasting and recording the what happened with their phones and tablets.
And were you present at the final protest on September 16th?
No, I was in my office when the statue was vandalized and Dell Hubbard was injured.
And are you aware how much the restoration of the statue will cost?
Yes, it could cost more than $10,000.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Ross?
Yes, Your Honor. Mayor Grimm, I would like to start off by talking about Barryton's council meetings. You attend council meetings, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And Britt Smithson attended quite a few of these meetings as well, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And he was accompanied by a few other people.
That is true, like 2 or 3, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And these events occurred in early spring of 2019, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And Britt Smithson and his company came to voice concerns about Altenberry's statue, correct?
That's true, yes.
But Tracy Whitney wasn't at any of these meetings.
No, Tracy Whitney was not at any of the meetings, no.
In fact, it wasn't actually until April 2019 that you first heard the name Tracy Whitney.
Yes, that's true.
Now, Mayor Graham, there are many legal and lawful ways in which a citizen of Barrington can express ideas and concerns, correct?
Yes, there are many. There are lots of ways, yes.
And one of these legal methods to express ideas and concerns is attending council meetings.
Yes, that's a possible way, yes.
And Britt Smithson and others attended council meetings, didn't they?
Yes, they did, yeah.
Another legal action one may take is to, let's say, write a letter.
Yes.
And you received a letter from DMITE.
Yes, I did.
A third legal method is to schedule a meeting with you.
Yes, that's a possible way too, yeah.
In fact, Britt Smithson scheduled a meeting with you.
Yes, Britt did.
Mayor Grimm, one could also hold a legal demonstration, right?
Yes.
DMITE also held several legal demonstrations.
Yes, they did. And the last one turned violent, yes.
But it was legal.
It was legal, yes.
Finally, a legal way to express ideas is to give speeches.
Yes.
And at these demonstrations, DMITE members gave speeches.
That is true. They gave lots of speeches, yes.
Briefly, let's talk about September 16th, 2019. There was a protest that day, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
However, you weren't at that protest.
No, I wasn't. I was in my office.
So you don't know exactly what happened.
No, because I wasn't present there to witness it.
Exactly. You didn't see the demonstration.
Not that one. No, I did not.
You didn't hear any of the speeches at the demonstration.
No.
Thank you, Mayor Grimm, for your time today, and no further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. May this witness be excused? All right, you are excused. Please call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Del Hubbard to the stand.
All right, Mr. Hubbard, you're still under, or Ms. Hubbard, you're still under oath?
Yes.
Sorry, and that was just a reference to the character. Sorry.
Good evening, Ms. Hubbard. Would you please state your full name and spell it for the record?
Sure, it's Del Hubbard, Hubbard.
And what's your purpose of testifying here today?
See, I was present at the DMITE protest that resulted in my serious injuries.
And what do you do for a living?
I used to work in the municipal facilities department for the city of Barrington as their head groundskeeper.
And are you currently working there?
No, I can't do the type of labor that my job requires, so I actually had to file for full disability.
And what did your job entail?
You know, construction, landscaping. I took care of the statues like Old Barry. I also cleaned up litter and the occasional graffiti from public places.
And have there been any recent complaints over the statue?
Well, several years ago, the city council approved funds to completely renovate the statue. And initially the complaints were about the cost, but then after the DMITE got involved, the complaints started focused more on the history of Old Barry. Once they got involved, things got messy.
In what way did things get messy?
Literally, the protesters held some events at the plaza. City didn't place any workers at the first two events, and my boys and I had to clean up after them. There was a lot more minor garbage and damage at those ones. Third event onwards, my crew and I were on standby for, so mess wasn't as bad as the first couple.
Now let's focus on the last protest that occurred on September 16th. Where were you?
I was down at the plaza while the final pro removal protest was going on. Again, my boys and I were on standby. I thought this one had a way different feel from the others though.
And what was different about this gathering?
There weren't as many people in attendance, and most of them I couldn't recognize from previous protests. They were all angrier too, focusing on the little response from city officials that the DMITE was getting about removing the statue.
And who spoke at this event?
Smithson and Everett looked to me like they were really stirring people up in a frenzy. There was someone else that everyone was listening to on their devices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying.
And what happened towards the end of the protest?
Well, when I thought things were about to break up, I moved my cleaning cart closer to Barry. Wesley Everett looked at me standing next to Barry, then jumped up on the poor guy and started screaming. Then Britt Smithson handed Everett a sledgehammer.
What happened after Britt Smithson handed Wesley Everett the sledgehammer?
Well, she grabbed that thing and started swinging it around, hitting Barry square in the chest, then on his shoulder. I didn't want old Barry, or anyone else for that matter, to get hurt. So I put my foot up on the base of the statue to climb up. I stared straight at Everett and I told her to knock it off.
And did Miss Everett stop?
She didn't. I looked down to find a handhold, and the next thing I know, there's this loud crack, and Barry's arm is flying straight at me. Kerpow, smack. I get absolutely clobbered. I'm talking broken scapula, collarbone, 3 different places, the works.
And after you were hit by the Barry statue, what did Miss Everett proceed to do?
She slammed the sledgehammer directly into the top of my skull.
And what were the results of your injuries after the protest?
Objection, relevance.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Please.
Your Honor, this goes to proving the assault charges by establishing that bodily harm occurred, which falls under jury instructions number 12 and 13.
I'll allow it.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to re-ask the question.
Please do.
What were the results of your injuries after the events of the protest?
Well, I have emotional scarring from the traumatic brain impact, and I had to have restorative surgery. And actually right now I'm doing some pretty intense physical therapy, but despite all that, I'll still never be able to do my type of job again.
Thank you, Ms. Hubbard. No further questions.
Any cross?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Miss Hubbard, on September 16th, 2019, you were working at the plaza.
Yes.
You worked there fairly often.
Yeah.
In fact, this was your 3rd gathering of that type that you had witnessed that summer.
Yes.
But these gatherings beforehand, they had always been peaceful, correct?
Yeah, they've been pretty peaceful.
But this gathering on the 16th, as you said, it was different, wasn't it?
Yeah, they all seemed really angry.
Miss Hubbard, you know who Wesley Everett is.
Well, I sure do now, yeah.
The main speaker at this event was Everett, was it not?
Everett and Smithson.
You don't recall Everett speaking before the 16th, do you, Miss Hubbard?
No, can't say that I do.
His speeches were trying to work people up, weren't they?
Objection, Your Honor. This calls for the witness to speculate.
Response?
Okay. Your Honor, Miss Hubbard can properly tell whether or not they were trying to work people up by the energy that the speaker was giving and whether or not the words were angry or like harsh in their tone.
I think Ms. Hubbard can testify as to her observations, but not really go into what the other person was attempting to do or not attempting to do. So I'm kind of not denying, and I'm not overruling, and I'm not allowing it either. Just kind of walk in the center.
May I rephrase the question?
Please do.
Miss Hubbard, Wesley Everett's speeches, from your point of view, were more harsh in their tone.
Her speech on the 16th.
Yes, Miss Hubbard.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I would say that.
So the one time the protests got violent, Everett made a speech.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during the protests, many people were holding phones and tablets.
Yeah.
And you saw many people listening to something on these devices, didn't you?
Yeah, I couldn't make out what the device was saying, though.
Yeah, you said it could have been more than one voice.
It could have. I'm not sure.
You don't know if you were just hearing feedback, Miss Hubbard.
I don't. Not for sure.
The speakers at the rally, Smithson and Everett, you said, were extremely loud, correct?
Yes.
These speakers, Miss Hubbard, were so loud that you said you doubt if they or anyone else present could hear the voice or voices on the device.
Yeah, I can't speak for anyone else, but I couldn't make out what they were saying.
Switching focus, you are familiar with Tracy Whitney.
Again, I am now, yes.
Throughout the rallies, Whitney wasn't ever physically present, was he?
No, I never saw him.
The people you saw leading the event were Smithson and Everett, not Whitney, correct?
Leading the event, sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, the people you saw leading the event were Smithson and Everett, not Whitney, correct?
Yes, on the 16th.
Whitney didn't give any speeches, did he?
No.
Whitney didn't hand Everett the sledgehammer, did he?
Britt Smithson did. Whitney did not.
Whitney didn't hit the statue, did he?
Whitney did not.
Whitney didn't hit you, did he?
No.
Whitney wasn't there at all, was he?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Hold on, please.
All
right. You may call your next witness then.
Thank you. The prosecution calls Detective Jaden Brandberg to the stand.
And you are still under oath.
All right. Good evening. Please state your full name and spell your last for the record.
My name is Jaden Brandberg. Last name Brandburg.
And would you describe your background experience in law enforcement?
During my 20 years in the law enforcement profession, I first received a criminal justice degree before spending 3 years as a general officer. Then I spent 6 years as part of an elite unit in the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency before accepting a position at the Barrington Police Department, where I'm currently employed.
And what is your current position there?
I've been the major crimes lead detective at the Barrington Police Department for 2 years now, which means I'm responsible for conducting the investigation of this case.
And what are your specific qualifications to speak on this case today?
During my time in the DEA, or Federal Drug Enforcement Agency, I received special training in listening and deciphering the coded language drug dealers utilize while conducting deals by telephone. In fact, my primary responsibility was listening, analyzing, and documenting thousands of hours where I take calls and conversations for hidden messages and codes.
Now let's discuss the events of September 16th. When did you arrive at the scene on this day?
I arrived at the scene of the Plaza Hammer Assault, as some of my colleagues had dubbed it, about a half an hour after the riot had occurred.
And could you please describe the state of the scene when you arrived?
When I arrived, the security officers already had one suspect, Wesley Everett, in custody and believed her accomplice had fled the scene. I then instructed my officers to cordon off the area and record and collect any possible items of evidence.
Now, after leaving the scene on September 16th, how did you proceed with your investigation?
First, I requested a full report on Hubbard's injuries. Then, when I returned to the station, Everett was in a holding and awaiting transport. So I began the initial questioning.
And would you please describe this initial questioning?
After giving the suspect an advice of rights, I attempted to interview Everett. However, she would only babble on about the need to knock down the blockhouse. Once I began decoding, it was evident that this was not the nonsense gibberish I initially believed it to be, but clearly pointed to evidence of a deeper collusion involved in this case.
Now let's discuss the events of September 17th. What development pertaining to the case occurred that day?
I witnessed a press conference held by DMIT at which Britt Smithson was answering questions from the media.
And could you please describe the press conference you witnessed on television?
Britt Smithson presented himself as a representative of the defendant, Tracy Whitney,
Objection,
an organization.
Your Honor, if I may respond, the detective is merely describing the nature of Britt Smithson's press conference and the purpose of the press conference being called, which was very easy to deduce without directly quoting anything that Smithson said. Additionally, Britt Smithson is co-conspirator to the defendant, so this qualifies as a hearsay exception.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Please.
No, the prosecution just offered this as a co-conspirator statement. However, they have not laid any of the proper foundation to admit it as such. They must show that Britt Smithson was a member of the conspiracy. They must show that this took place during the conspiracy, and they must show that this took place in furtherance of the conspiracy, and they have not shown any of these. Furthermore, Detective Brandberg just stated that Britt Smithson presented himself as a sort of envoy of debunking mystery, which is a direct quote.
Sir, how is this offered for the truth of the statement?
Well, as Detective Brandberg just said, Britt Smithson was offering this, or Britt Smithson claimed to be offering this as a speaker on behalf of Tracy Whitney, the Debunking Mystery organization, which is exactly what it was offered for.
I understand, but I don't know that I'm going to allow it.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will restate my question.
Please do.
Detective, please describe the press conference you witnessed on television.
Britt Smithson presented himself as a representative of the defendant Tracy Whitney and an organization known as Debunking Myth Story. However, I found suspicious that they felt the need to disassociate themselves from Everett's actions and defend their organization, since no one had mentioned or even insinuated that Everett was associated with DMIT. So I headed back to the station to continue my questioning.
And would you please describe your conversation?
When I first stepped into the interview room, Everett was quite agitated and yelled, "They're not going to cut me loose like this. I didn't act alone. This wasn't even my idea."
Your Honor, if I may respond, this is a hearsay exception. Miss Everett was read the Miranda rights prior to making the statement, and again when the detective returned to the station and made the statement which the detective is now relaying.
I'll sustain the objection. Move on.
Thank you. What was your next step in this investigation?
My next step was to follow the lead I had gained during the questioning of Everett, and so I began that by interviewing members of
Objection assumes facts, not an evidence.
Response?
Your Honor, I don't quite understand what the opposing counsel is objecting to.
Okay. I'll allow the question and testimony. Go ahead and repeat your question.
Thank you. What was the next step in your investigation?
My next step was to follow the leads from Wesley Everett's questioning, and I then interviewed members of open DMIT meetings and did further background digging into the organization itself.
And what were your findings on the DMIT organization?
I found articles on crime scenes all involving DMIT. At each one of the crime scenes, a statue of an important historical statue was damaged, and in one, the Australian incident, a security officer was left gravely injured. This evidence, along with the communication dates Everett had provided, gave me probable cause to have a judge issue a warrant.
Could you please outline the specifics of the search warrants you issued next?
The warrant was limited to the very specific dates and times and numbers and accounts to the internet platform Everett used in communication with Whitney.
And how successful were these search warrants in obtaining relevant evidence for this case?
I found several significant messages now marked as Exhibit 5.
Now let's discuss the messages you decoded. What methods did you use to analyze the various documents created by Whitney?
Whether it's drug dealers, gangs, or conspirators, the techniques for decoding their communications is essentially the same. First, I learned the frequency of certain phrases and concepts important to the group. Next, I analyzed the messages for places where Whitney or Everett may have been deliberately avoiding symbols important to DMIT and substituting less associated language in its place. Finally, a code could be deciphered as knowing what was important to the code writer. In this case, myth and history.
And could you provide a specific example of this code?
The repeated and frequent use of the phrase energetic tango or ET is classic criminal coding. Here, Whitney chooses a symbol that is not associated with DMIT or history, and this deliberate shift in focus highlights its importance as a hidden message.
What are other common uses of this code?
It's especially popular among violent and right-wing militias, often used to promise armed rebellion.
And what does the use of this code in this particular context signify?
By playing up popular culture, Whitney is signaling that the group's plan is both imminent and violent. This is the perfect code phrase for an attack if spoken by the person at the top of criminal or organizational hierarchy.
And what are some other prominent examples of the code used by DMIT?
The DMIT website also features quotations from peaceful historical figures such as Gandhi or Thoreau. However, these quotations include supplementary inflammatory language, a tactic that, in my expert analysis, acts as a hidden call for violence.
And what is the purpose of these coded alterations?
These changes in terminology allows Whitney to outwardly profess a pure motive while subtly signaling the need for destructive force to followers in the know.
And what conclusions did your expert analysis yield in this investigation?
Based on online evidence and communications between group members, I'm able to confidently conclude that Tracy Whitney repeatedly communicated through the use of coded language the need for direct violent action under the mask of a pure and peaceful movement to group members.
Thank you, Detective. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Detective Brandberg, on direct, you mentioned that you worked with the DEA for a while.
Yes, that is correct, for 6 years.
And this is where you learned about decoding?
This is where I learned and worked decoding, yes.
Now, you decoded calls and messages from drug traffickers there, didn't you?
Yes, and I learned various other ways to decode phrases and other, yes.
Now, today's case doesn't deal with drug trafficking, does it?
No, however, the methods for decoding codes do not vary between organizations.
So today's case doesn't deal with drug traffickers, does it?
As I said, no, it doesn't. However, the techniques for decoding things do not vary whether it's conspirators or drug dealers.
All right, well, today's case does deal with the chapter of a history or activist organization.
An activist organization that's being charged with conspiracy, yes.
So to redirect you back to my question, it does deal with a history activist organization.
A history activist organization whose leader is being tried as part of a conspiracy, yes.
Now, you believe that this organization has some malicious intentions.
Yes, that is what the evidence supports and what my expert analysis finds.
And several of these messages are hidden in code phrases.
Yes, that is correct.
The most important of these is energetic tango.
Yes, that is correct.
You claim that this is a violent trigger word, or a trigger word for violent action, rather.
Yes, that is what my analysis found.
Now, you're also able to access some emails between Wesley Everett and the defendant, Tracy Whitney.
Yes, I am.
And in one of these emails, Wesley Everett uses that phrase.
He does, yes.
And Whitney isn't exactly happy about it, is he?
I do not understand what you mean by this question.
Whitney's response to this phrase, energetic tango, isn't exactly happy about it.
Objection, Your Honor. I would ask that the opposing counsel be a little more specific for the witness.
Let's see if the witness can answer it as rephrased. Mr. Rowell, will you repeat your question, please?
Yes, I can rephrase it a little bit. Now, Whitney says to never use this phrase in contact with him, doesn't he?
I assume you're referring to when Whitney says, told you before, don't use that phrase in any public email or communication with me. I hate it. However, here Whitney doesn't specify which phrase he's referring to.
But he does say that he hates the phrase that was mentioned.
Yes, but we cannot be confident on which phrase he was mentioning because there was time in between the two emails. And as Whitney claims, his entire network was shut down. So there are many messages that have been lost.
But Detective Brandberg, the message that you found just before this used the phrase energetic tango, did it not?
Yes. And as I said, it is not, I cannot confidently conclude that Tracy Whitney was saying, I hate it to energetic tango. And it would be speculation to do so.
Detective, I'm not asking for your conclusion here, just asking if the message before this one used the phrase energetic tango. And it did, didn't it?
It did, but there could have been messages in between them.
Again, I'm not asking about these messages. I'm just asking if Wesley Everett used the phrase energetic
Objection,
tango.
Your Honor. I believe that the witness has answered the question being asked.
I disagree. I think Ms. Morrell should re-ask the question.
I'll re-ask it. In the message before this, Mr. Whitney says, I hate this phrase, Wesley Everett uses the phrase energetic tango, doesn't he?
The only message that I could recover, yes.
But he does use that phrase.
As I said, in the only message I could recover, yes.
Now, Detective Brandberg, at the beginning of your investigation, you weren't able to find much on DMIT or anyone else other than Tracy Whitney, or excuse me, other than Wesley Everett.
Well, it had been 24 hours, and what sparked my initial interest in DMIT was the press conference Britt Smithson held.
But you weren't able to find anything to further your case until you talked to Wesley Everett.
It was Wesley Everett who called me.
And when you talked to Mrs. Everett, she mentioned something called the inner circle.
Yes.
Now, she even gave you a couple of names of supposed members of this inner circle.
Yes, the main ones being Tracy Whitney and Britt Smithson.
When you were, other than Tracy Whitney and Britt Smithson, you were able to track down a couple of these people.
Yes.
But none of them were able to give you any useful information, were they?
None were willing to openly admit. And remember, this is a crime that is being heavily investigated by police forces. And if I had no evidence against them, and my In my experience, people do not just openly admit and share information.
Your Honor, motion to strike the witness's testimony is not responsive.
Ask your question again.
All right. Detective Brandberg, none of the people you questioned gave you any information, did they?
Not openly, no.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Next witness.
Your Honor, the prosecution has no more witnesses to call at this time.
Okay. And I believe this is when the request for a 5-minute break was. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And we will take a 5-minute break. And are we ready to resume?
Yes, the prosecution is ready.
And defense?
Defense is also ready.
Okay. All right. And are my raters back? I got two. Where's my third one? There we are. Okay. Then let's get started. Defense may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call A. Lynn Strong.
All right. Please remember that you are still that you are under oath.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is A. Lynn Strong.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Strong?
I'm a reporter for the Barrington Standard. My primary beat is local government happenings, you know.
And why are you here today?
I'm here because I covered a demonstration in front of the Alton-Berry statue on September 16th for the Barrington Standard.
Now, Mr. Strong, I'm going to move on and discuss this demonstration you were at. Why were you there?
Well, like I said, I was there to cover the demonstration for the Standard. I took notes as a reporter, but unfortunately also had to take pictures as a photographer because our company can't afford to send both a photographer and a reporter to events like that.
And what was happening at this protest?
Well, there were a couple DMIT members who all gave speeches. It was really similar to the protest previous to that. You know, it was kind of loud. Britt Smithson and some other DMIT members gave speeches about how they wanted to perhaps petition the city council.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Sir, response?
Yes, Your Honor. There's no specific statement that's being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It's just in general that speeches were made. There's no.
I would agree. I would agree. If the witness can restate the answer again, please.
Mr. Strong, I'll re-ask that question. What was happening at the protest?
So at the protest, Britt Smithson and some other DMIT members gave speeches. These were about perhaps petitioning the city council to go back on their decision, as well as possibly appealing their decision. It was really nothing out of the ordinary. It was a lot like the previous protests.
And from what you could observe, how were these DMIT speakers behaving?
Well, you know, they were definitely passionate about getting the statue removed, and I could kind of tell that they felt strongly about it. But
Objection, Your Honor. I believe this is speculation. He cannot necessarily testify to their feelings about or their emotional status at the time of the speeches.
Response?
Your Honor, it's based on his rationally based perception from him viewing these speeches as he characterized as passionate. He could gather that they had strong feelings about the cause that they were advocating for.
To certainly relay your questions. Then like I could tell they felt this way, but I think they appeared would be acceptable.
Yes,
Go
Your
ahead,
Honor.
ask the question.
Yes, Your Honor. And from what you could observe, how did these DMIT speakers appear?
well, they appeared to be, like I said, passionate but peaceful. They definitely don't indicate violence or destruction.
Now, Mr. Strong, I want to move on and just talk about Miss Everett. Do you know who Wesley Everett is?
Yes, I do.
How do you know Wesley Everett?
Well, I saw Wesley Everett at that 5th protest.
And what did she do at the demonstration?
Well, I do believe that Ms. Everett gave a speech at that demonstration, shoved something into Britt Smithson, ran down to the statue of Alton-Berry, jumped up onto it, and took a sledgehammer to the statue.
Now, did any other DMIT member do this?
No, it was just Everett.
And were you able to see anybody's reactions to Everett's actions?
Yes, I saw Britt Smithson's reaction.
And how did Britt Smithson react?
Well, from what I observed, I thought that Britt was surprised, and I could tell that Britt was shaking.
Well, thank you, Mr. Smithson. Pardon me, Mr. Strong, for your time here today and no further questions, Your Honor.
Any cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Strong. Now, the newspaper you work for, the Barryton Standard, was owned by your great-grandfather, correct?
Yes, it was.
And your uncle is currently an editor on the newspaper.
He was an editor. He's not an editor anymore.
But he was an editor at the time of your gaining an employment on the newspaper, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And wouldn't you say that your familial connections on this newspaper in some way helped compensate for your lack of experience coming into the business?
Not necessarily, no.
Thank you. Now, your primary scope of reporting is City Hall and Municipal Court, correct?
Yes.
Now you became acquainted with Mr. Smithson, a spokesperson for DMIT, a few years ago in the fall of 2018. Isn't that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And Smithson was willing to provide quotes and information for your stories?
Yeah, I stumbled upon a genuine good source.
You even developed a good working relationship with him.
Yep, I did.
But didn't this change when you wanted to report about the DMIT organization and requested to interview Tracy Whitney?
Well, I had wanted to report about the DMIT organization the entire time, and Britt didn't have any mention of him being estranged to my questioning.
But when you made this request to interview Tracy Whitney, Smithson cut off all communication with you altogether after this simple request. Isn't that true?
No, that's not true.
It's not true. Smithson did not cut off communication with you after this simple request to interview Tracy Whitney.
Smithson did not only cut off communication with me, no.
But your good working relationship with Smithson did rather change after you made this request.
I guess you could say that.
Thank you. And Smithson also refused to deny DMIT's involvement in the threatening saturation campaign on Town Hall.
That is correct.
Now, you were on the scene reporting on the DMIT demonstration on September 16th, 2019, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you were responsible for acting as both a photographer and a reporter.
Yes.
But this level of multitasking did make it difficult for you to take notes, isn't that right?
I wouldn't say it was necessarily difficult for me to take notes. I am a reporter by trade, and I often report in places that are fairly chaotic. Not that the protest was chaotic, but just there was a lot going on.
But you were multitasking while you were doing multiple things while you were trying to take notes, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And you were watching the DMIT broadcast of the event on your tablet, correct?
I tried to.
And during this broadcast, you noticed brief video clips of Whitney flash over the live stream at various points in time.
I did.
There was one including just before Everett's actions at the statue, correct?
I believe so.
And you were observing the events at the statue from a distance, weren't you?
I was.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly.
Please go ahead.
Mr. Strong, was there a live stream at the demonstration you were at?
Yes, there was.
And did you watch it?
I did watch it, or I tried to.
And when you were watching the DMI broadcast, what did you see?
Well, I saw brief, well, it was, like I said, it was a broadcast of the protest, so I saw that. I also saw brief little, what looked like video clips of Tracy Whitney. They seemed really similar to some similar ads, pop-ups, videos, whatever you want to call them, that I had seen earlier trying to contact Whitney through the DMIT website.
Thank you, Mr. Strong. No further questions.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Next witness, or may this witness be excused? Okay. All right, next witness.
Your Honor, the defense would like to call Mr. Britt Smithson.
All right, please remember that you've been previously sworn in. And go ahead.
Yes. Would you please state your name for the court?
Good evening. I'm Britt Smithson.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Smithson?
I'm the owner of Smithson Construction. We do commercial and housing projects all across Pine County. For example, you know that mini mall on Fifth Street? We built that.
And okay, Mr. Smithson, now let's talk about DMITE. How are you involved with DMITE?
I'm the leader of the local Barryton chapter of DMITE.
And how did you get interested in the group's mission?
Well, a couple years ago, I started to dig into my ancestors, and I found some really worrying information about Alton Berry. I found that he wasn't a very good guy. He exploited his workers, and he certainly shouldn't be commemorated in front of City Hall with a statue. And I was so concerned by this that I started my own study group to focus on Pine County's history, and eventually we became a DMITE chapter.
How did your study group become a part of DMITE?
In 2019, I came across the DMITE website, and I was interested in its ideas of organization, and I thought it'd be a really interesting way to take our group from being just a study group and into more of an action-based direction.
And as chapter head, could you describe the relationship between your chapter and the larger DMITE organization?
Yes, we work like a fast food franchise, like a McDonald's, for example, where we're associated with DMITE, but we act independently. This means that we alone organize our own demonstrations and our own protests with little to no input from DMITE.
And briefly, Mr. Smithson, do you know who Tracy Whitney is?
Yes, he's the leader of the overall DMITE organization.
Now I want to transition and talk a bit about Miss Everett. Are you familiar with Miss Everett?
Yes, she was once a member of DMITE.
And how did Everett first become a part of DMITE?
When we became an official DMITE chapter, we attracted tons of new members, and sadly, Miss Everett was one of them.
And did your DMITE branch ever meet with local government?
Yes, we did. We held a meeting with Mayor Grimm to discuss the statue.
Was Everett included in these meetings with Mayor Grimm?
No, our group decided that he wasn't the best fit for the meeting. Frankly, we were scared that something would happen that would jeopardize the goals of that meeting, which were to peacefully remove the statue.
Now, Mr. Smithson, let's talk about September 16th. What happened on this day?
That day, we held our 5th protest of the summer in front of City Hall.
Could you tell me what you were doing before the demonstration?
Yes, that morning I headed off to work.
Your Honor, relevance?
I'll allow it.
I'll re-ask the question, Mr. Smithson. Could you tell me what you were doing before the demonstration?
Yes, that morning I headed off to work at an apartment building on 3rd. It's under construction, and I spent my whole morning there, ordering my workers around, making sure we had the right kinds of floor tiles, and those sorts of things. And eventually, around midday, I left to go to the protest.
What was your role at the demonstration?
I was one of its main organizers, and I was supposed to speak at the event. And I also took on the responsibility of live streaming the protest so other members of DMITE could see what we were doing.
What about Miss Everett? What was her role at the demonstration?
I didn't expect her to play a big role or anything, but she did. I did ask her to hold my tablet while I was speaking so that the broadcast could continue to be live streamed.
Did she do anything else other than hold your tablet?
Yes, I didn't expect her to, but she gave a very passionate speech. But it's a free country, so who was I to stop her?
What happened after her speech?
Well, a little while later, I was giving my own speech when all of a sudden she jumped up, shoved my tablet right into my chest, and jumped onto the statue.
And what could you see as she made her way onto the statue's base?
I could see that she was holding something, a sledgehammer, my sledgehammer.
Why did you have a sledgehammer that day?
Well, as I touched on before, I was at work at a construction site. And when I go to work, I bring all my tools with me. And among these tools, what was a sledgehammer?
Now, do you have any idea how Wesley Everett got a hold of your sledgehammer?
No, I don't. I certainly didn't give it to him.
And after you saw Wesley with the sledgehammer, what did you see?
The last thing I saw was him holding the sledgehammer high above his head. And the rest was just such a shock to the system that I can't recall it.
Now, Mr. Smithson, earlier today, we've heard the term energetic tango being discussed. Have you ever heard this term?
Yes, I have.
What does this term mean?
It's a funny nickname we gave to Tracy Whitney. You see, a little while back, we found a video of him dancing at some sort of event, and he was a terrible, terrible dancer. So to poke fun at this, we gave him the nickname Energetic Tango.
Well, thank you, Mr. Smithson, for your time here today, and no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Smithson.
Good evening.
Currently, you are facing charges yourself, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
And backpedaling a little bit, it was you who started the study group that eventually turned into a DMIT chapter in 2017, is that correct?
Yes, it was called the Pine County All Historical Society.
And it was you who decided to become a chapter of Tracy Whitney's DMIT organization?
Yes, I found the materials online. I showed it to our group, and we as a whole decided to become a DMIT chapter.
So as you said, Tracy Whitney provided you with methods, protest techniques, and materials, is that correct?
His website did, yes.
And prior to becoming a part of this organization, your study group really only had discussions and no real action, is that correct?
Yes, we simply didn't have the resources to take action.
And you and a couple of regular participants formed a sort of inner circle, is that correct?
That's one word for it, yes.
You often went out to drinks after a meeting, is that correct?
Yes, we went out to drinks. We had interesting discussions about historical topics, and yes.
You and this group did, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And Wesley Everett often went to these, was often present at these after dinner meetings, is that correct?
No.
But she was present at least a couple of them, is that correct?
She went to one or two, yes.
And is it true that you and Tracy communicated often?
We communicated, yes.
And you mainly communicated through an encrypted channel?
I believe it was, yes.
And I understand we do not have access to these messages as your computer was destroyed, is that correct?
Yes, sadly, I was walking past the Barrington River, clearing my mind after the protest, holding my computer right in my hands. I tripped and it fell. I jumped in after it, but I couldn't get it.
Yes, and it fell in a river, as you just said.
Yes, as I just said.
And this was shortly after Wesley was arrested on September 16th, is that correct?
It was that day, yes.
And you gave Wesley Everett Tracy Whitney's information, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And to your knowledge, did Wesley Everett and Tracy Whitney communicate often?
To my knowledge, Wesley told me they did, but other than that, I'm not sure.
Thank you. Let's move on to the day of the protest, September 16th. You assigned Wesley Everett to be in charge of the live stream, is that correct?
Only while I was speaking.
And you gave a speech that day, didn't you?
I did.
And prior to giving that speech, you gave Wesley this tablet, which was broadcasting the live stream, was it?
Yes, I did.
And you were aware that Whitney was watching this live stream at the time, were you not?
I believe he was on the call.
And did you hear Whitney's voice come through the live stream during your speech?
I think so, yes.
And it was directly after that Wesley Everett jumped onto the statue with a sledgehammer, is that correct?
It was a little while later, yes.
No, I believe it was directly after you heard that. Is that correct?
I heard it, and then a little while later, Wesley Everett jumped onto the statue and destroyed it.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. First, Mr. Smithson, was this inner circle anything more than just a group to go get drinks and talk about your study group's matters?
No, even after we joined DMI, it remained the same people. We went out to a restaurant after, had a couple of drinks, had some interesting discussions about Alton Berry, and some other really interesting Pine County topics.
And finally, why did you give Wesley Everett Whitney's contact information?
Well, Wesley asked for it.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Smithson, and no further questions.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. May this witness be excused? All right, then we will call the next witness for defense.
The defense calls Professor Hess to the stand.
All right, Professor Hess, please remember that you are under oath.
Hello, and can you please introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Robin Hess.
Mr. Hess, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a professor. I teach legal and social studies at Fair Harbor College. I've been teaching for about 20 years now.
Professor Hess, what's your expertise in that field?
Well, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology, but more importantly for today's case, I have a Juris Doctorate from the University of Puget Sound Law School.
How are you involved in today's case?
I've been asked to provide my opinions on the factors a juror should consider when deciding whether the communications between Tracy Whitney and the DMI movement are protected by the First Amendment.
And how did you prepare for today's case?
In preparation for today's case, I reviewed all of the exhibits that were available to me in evidence.
Professor Hess, what was the method you used to determine if Tracy Whitney's speech was protected?
Well, I used the Brandenburg test, which is commonly used in my field for this kind of thing.
Could you tell me what this Brandenburg test is used for?
The Brandenburg test is used to determine whether oral or written expressions violate the First Amendment. If a statement lacks intent, likelihood, or imminence, then it is protected by the First Amendment.
Professor Hess, can you go more in depth with these terms, starting with intent?
Well, intent means that the speech must be intended to cause lawless action.
And moving on to imminence, can you clarify what this means?
Imminence means that the action must have a definite timeline. Proposing that something might happen in the future is not enough to lose the protection of the First Amendment.
And finally, what does likelihood mean in this context?
Likelihood, in the context of the Brandenburg test, means that an expression must have a high chance of causing imminent lawless action.
How many of these conditions must be met to make speech not protected by the First Amendment?
In order for a statement to lose its First Amendment protections, it must meet all three of these conditions.
Let's apply that test to some exhibits. Professor Hess, have you reviewed the letter signed by Whitney to Mayor Graham?
Yes, I have.
May my co-counsel please display the previously admitted exhibit number 6.
It's visible.
Professor Hess, could you please read aloud the last paragraph in that letter?
Of course. We demand that you present this proposal to the City Council and seek their quick approval of our proposal. Immediate compliance will avoid any unpleasant consequences for Barrington, its facilities, and its employees. Your prompt attention to this matter is expected.
Professor Hess, using the elements of the Brandenburg test, is this letter protected speech?
Yes, I would say it is.
Why?
As I just read, Tracy says in the letter, immediate compliance will avoid any unpleasant consequences. To be classified as an imminent action, there must be a date or time which this statement lacks.
Professor Hess, have you reviewed the text between Wesley Everett and Tracy Whitney?
I have, yes.
May my co-counsel please switch to the previously admitted exhibit number 5, page 62. Professor Hess, can you read aloud that first text on the right-hand side?
It states, ready to bring the hammer down tomorrow.
Professor Hess, is this text protected speech?
Yes, again, it is.
Why?
In my experience, you should interpret words according to their common meaning, because in most cases, that's how the audience will process them. The text states, ready to bring the hammer down, which is a common idiom. Like I said, the audience will process this statement by acting on the common meaning, which is not to literally hit something with a hammer. To simplify this, in my opinion, the text lack intent.
Professor Hess, have you reviewed statements on the DMI website?
I have.
And my co-counsel please display exhibit number 2, page 54. Professor Hess, do you know what this is?
This is a part of the DMA website.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of the website?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the defense offers up exhibit number 2 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
So admitted?
Professor Hess, in your expert opinion, are all the statements on this website protected speech?
Objection, Your Honor. Ultimate issue.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Please do.
It is not the ultimate issue. Determining whether it's protected speech is within Hess's expert opinion. He is allowed to use the Brandenburg test to determine this.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, you may. Wait, hold on. Counsel, you broke up. Start over.
Sorry, Your Honor. Your Honor, the witness's testimony shouldn't communicate a legal standard to the jury. It's the judge's role to discuss to the jury anything regarding law. And by stating that this document falls under free speech indicates that Tracy Whitney is therefore not guilty, and in criminal cases under Rule 407B, an expert witness shall not express an opinion as to the guilt or innocence of the accused.
Your Honor, may I respond?
So,
This is not a legal issue. He's simply determining whether this is protected speech.
Your Honor, may I respond?
last one.
Your Honor, the First Amendment is considered a legal document, so therefore it is indicating the legality of it.
Thank you both for your arguments. I will allow the testimony. Please re-ask the question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Professor Hess, in your expert opinion, are all of the statements on this website protected speech?
Well, to reiterate what I said before, in order to be protected speech, the statements on this website would have to lack intent, likelihood, and/or imminence. It's in my expert opinion that today the statement is lacking all three. I mean, it's arguable that the contents on the website do not even call for violent action in the first place.
Thank you. No further questions.
Hey, Cross.
Yes, Your Honor.
Please go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Hess. Now, your purpose here today is to assist the jurors on understanding the speech used throughout this case. Isn't that right?
That's correct, yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about your analysis. So your conclusion was based solely on the evidence found within this case. Isn't that right?
And I use the Brandenburg test, which is commonly used for this kind of thing, yes.
This means you didn't factor in the defendant or other members of Debunking Mysteries witness statements when forming your conclusion. Isn't that right?
Like I said, I've only reviewed the evidence that was, the evidence, not the witness statements, yes.
This means you also didn't factor in the actual events of the protests either. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now I want to talk a little bit about hidden meanings throughout this case. So you previously said in your witness statement, quote, that the content of communication obviously should play a large role in determining whether speech may be banned, unquote. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you also said that, phrases can have hidden meanings and that code words exist in our language?
I did say that, yes, but I also said that it should be interpreted according to the common meaning.
So you do believe words should be interpreted to their common meanings generally?
Yes, generally.
So were you here when Detective Jaden Brandenburg shared her testimony today?
I was, yes.
And so you heard how she described that deciphering and understanding the use of code words is an essential part of this case, correct?
Yes, I heard that.
Now I want to talk a little bit about Exhibit 5. So, Your Honor, permission to share my screen?
Please do.
May I have some confirmation to see if you can see Exhibit 5?
It is visible.
Thank you, Your Honor. So with Exhibit 5, okay, so you previously, Mr. Hess, this is a correspondence that you reviewed between Tracy Whitney and Wesley Everett, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so now you previously said, so you previously said in your witness statement that there was no timeline for illegal conduct stated, let me rephrase my question. You previously said in your witness statement that there was no timeline for illegal conduct regarding material on the website and within the messages, correct?
That's correct.
But is it, will you read the first text for me, please?
It says, ready to bring the hammer down tomorrow.
Would you agree with me? Can we both agree that the word tomorrow would be considered a specific date?
It would, yes. But again, ready to bring the hammer down is an idiom.
And so these messages were sent on September 15th, correct?
They were, yes.
And the vandalism of the statue and the assault of Del Hubbard with a sledgehammer occurred the following day, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So wouldn't therefore that be considered a timeline?
Well, because it's the use of an idiom, I would say no.
Mr. Hess, I'm referring to the use of the word tomorrow, not the use of the phrase bringing the hammer down. Would that be considered a timeline?
Sure, you could consider that a timeline, but you cannot just focus on one part, which you're referring to the imminence. You also have to focus on the intent as well as the likelihood in a certain speech, because that is what the Brandenburg test is.
So you're contradicting what you previously said in your witness statement. Are you changing your opinion that there is a timeline that was expressed within this document?
Wait, can you repeat that, please?
So are you now expressing that there is a timeline that has been expressed within some of the communications?
Not sure if it's a timeline.
But did you not just say that the use of the word tomorrow could be considered a timeline?
I said that it could be considered as imminence.
Now I would like to talk a little bit about exhibit number 3. Your Honor, permission to change, permission to share my screen to exhibit number 3.
Please do.
This is exhibit 3, and excuse me. So can I ask, I'm going to ask you a few questions to identify this document.
Okay.
Was this document was it included in your analysis?
I'm not sure if it's just me, but I still see the text.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to share my screen.
I think you are sharing. There you go. You just need to switch to the one you want to look at.
Is that the right document? Can you see it?
That's an exhibit 3 is what I'm looking at.
I apologize, Your Honor. So this was a document that you used for your analysis, correct?
It was, yes.
And this was found on the Debunking Mystery website?
It was.
Is this a true and accurate copy?
Yes, it is. I believe so.
Your Honor, at this time, we ask that exhibit 3 be moved into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Please proceed. It's so admitted.
Now you previously said in your witness statement that this didn't meet the Brandenburg test because of the lack of expression, the lack of expression of the location of the Berry statue, and the lack of, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But the poster says Barrington, Washington, correct?
Yeah, but that's not a very specific location. And in fact, it's referring to a public place.
But isn't the Barrington statue found in a public location that a lot of the people in Barrington would be aware of?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Professor Hess, in your opinion, is the poster made by the Demite protected speech?
Yes, it is.
Why?
Well, can you say that again? I think I missed it.
What element of the Brandenburg test is this poster missing?
I would say it misses intent.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, may this witness be excused? All right, defense can call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the defense calls Tracy Whitney to the stand.
All right, please remember that you're under oath. Go ahead.
Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Good evening. My name is Tracy Whitney.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Whitney?
Well, I used to be a part-time history professor, but that was a drag, and I'm much happier working full-time on my nonprofit organization, Debunking Mystery.
What is Debunking Mystery?
Debunking Mystery, or DMIT, is a place where I post my own articles about statues and how to remove them.
Now, how do you run this organization?
Well, I'm the founder, but there's over 100 affiliates worldwide. Groups, which are now called chapters, reached out to me to use my materials, and each chapter has their own goal, which they work towards.
Do you run each of these chapters personally?
No, if I had to run all the chapters myself, I'd be drowning in paperwork. That's worse than when I was teaching part-time history. I let the chapter leaders like Britt Smithson, who led the Barrington chapter, take care of whatever happens in the local area. All chapter leaders have to pay a startup fee to be a part of DMIT.
Do you speak directly with the members of these chapters?
I speak directly with the chapter leaders, but they can refer other members to me, and so sometimes I'll speak to them.
When you communicate with DMIT members, what mediums do you use?
My staff team drafts emails for me to make it easier to communicate with chapters. Chapter leaders like Britt Smithson, I communicate with them using other messaging apps. And to communicate through chapters to the chapters, we use video conferences like how we are doing right now.
Now, we've heard a lot about the events of September 16th, 2019, so I'd like to move on to that. Could you tell us where you were that day?
I was in my home in the Midwest doing some paperwork.
And what were you doing on the night of the 16th?
Well, as I said, I did some paperwork and then I watched a protest that was going on in Georgia. And since Smithson already set up everything, I watched the Barrington protest.
Were you leading this protest?
No, Britt Smith chapter leaders set up everything within their local area, and so I was mainly just spectating this protest.
Were you able to participate?
Yes, we use the same live streaming program for security and consistency. It has a feature where I can speak through it and raise the volume on either side.
Did you use this feature on September 16th?
No, I can't remember if I did, but if I did say anything during it, there were probably small things like good job or other things similar to that. It's not like I was giving a speech.
But on the protest on September 16th in Barrington, did you ever shout the phrase energetic tango?
No, I wouldn't use the phrase energetic tango.
Why is that?
Well, it's honestly a really silly nickname for me that my friends gave to me about my dancing skills, and friends like to joke around, but I personally think that I dance pretty well.
Mr. Whitney, are you aware of what happened at the Barrington protest?
Yes, Britt Smithson told me afterwards what had happened, and we've heard more today in court, so I'm very sorry for what happened to Del Hubbard.
Did you intend for Wesley Everett to take the actions he did?
No, I didn't intend
Question, Your
for him
Honor,
to
ultimate issue?
Your Honor, this isn't an opinion. This is the witness stating his own information on his own state of mind.
I would agree. I'll allow it.
I'll re-ask that question. Did you intend for Everett to take the actions that he took on September 16th?
No, I didn't intend for him to do that. In fact, I wasn't even expecting her to do anything similar to that, since she never talked during the meetings or were mentioned during the video conferences, and I didn't know anything about what they were doing until Smithson told me after the protest, but I didn't ask her to do anything of that sort.
Well, after she had taken these actions, how did you respond?
Well, I told Smithson to hold a press conference to make it clear that Wesley Everett was acting irrationally and without the support of the DMIT organization. We've stopped all activity from Barrington chapter that day because we do not condone violence or property destruction.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Whitney. And as you have mentioned, you are the head of your organization, DMIT, is that correct?
Yes, it's my pride and joy.
And the DMIT chapter run by Britt Smithson is also a part of your organization.
Yes, it's one of the 100 affiliates worldwide.
And when a chapter is set up, I understand that materials and services are provided to your new chapters?
Yes, they all have to pay a startup fee to use my materials, which I write.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
And I understand that you also use encrypted back channels to communicate with people within DMIT. Is that correct?
Yes, we use those encrypted messages to those other messaging apps for my safety and for privacy.
So you feel the need to use encrypted messages for your safety?
Yes, the government's always watching you somehow, whether it's through your phone calls or text messages.
And I understand you use these channels to communicate with Mr. Smithson?
Yes, I use them to communicate with all chapter leaders.
And also with Miss Everett, correct?
Yes, I'm sure I contacted them with other Barrington members from the Barrington chapter.
And is it true that you are the only one who would be responding to messages in these private chats?
I should be.
And however, we do not have access to some of these messages as the computers they were on were erased in October of 2019. Is that correct?
Yes, we upgraded our technology.
Which was quite shortly after Wesley Everett got arrested. Is that correct?
Yes, I wasn't contacted about that, so I didn't know they would want any of this stuff.
I understand that you also use emails to communicate with people within DMIT.
Yes, my staff members can draft emails from my account, though.
So you've heard today emails from Exhibit 5 being referenced. Is that correct?
Yes.
But it is true that you are not necessarily the one who wrote that email. Is that correct?
Yes, my staff members could have written them.
Let's move on to the day of the protest, September 16th. I understand you joined the live stream of this protest. Is that correct?
Yes, I was spectating it.
And as you have said, you had the ability to increase the volume and decrease it. Is that correct?
Yes, it's part of our consistency and for security reasons as well.
And you also had the ability to speak during this live stream?
Yes, if I did speak, then they were probably just small, encouraging things like good job or something similar.
And do you often make comments during the live streams?
Yes, it'd be weird not to talk at all and just stare at the protest and go unfolding.
Thank you. Your Honor, no further questions.
Hey, redirect.
Just one question, Your Honor. Mr. Whitney, why do you use encrypted messaging services?
For my privacy and security. The government's always watching you somehow, and it's a way to escape that.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Okay, may this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Next defense witness.
That's the last witness for the defense. The defense rests.
Okay. All right, and I believe we will be moving on to closing arguments. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I had trouble unmuting there for a second, but I got it.
Anything we need to deal with before we get to closing?
From the prosecution, no, Your Honor.
And from the defense, nothing.
Okay. All right. Prosecution can start.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, may it please the court. Today, you have heard about an organization that claims to exist for and fights to work to make the world a better place, with the mission of eliminating historical statues which honor individuals who committed unjust acts. However, if we solely view this case from that perspective, we will fail to hold a living individual, Tracy Whitney, accountable for his own criminal actions. When Wesley Everett moved to Barryton, she was a young, lonely, impressionable woman who was searching for a place where she could contribute to universal good and find self-worth. She believed she had found this within the organization Debunking Myth Story and moved up quickly to the inner circle. Whitney made Wesley feel as though she was essential to the success of their overall goal. However, all Wesley was to Whitney was a puppet who was recruited to carry out the dirty work of a criminal conspiracy. After reeling her in, Whitney slowly began pulling strings to make Wesley participate in criminal acts. In the beginning, it was small things like asking Wesley to send threatening messages to Mayor Graham and showing her the techniques to cover her tracks. During the protest on September 16th, Tracy Whitney, while not physically present at the protest, attended the live stream and had the capabilities to unmute and used this capability to interject an audible scream, energetic tango, at a point of high tension during the protest. This phrase was the call to action signal, and it was this verbal interjection which led Wesley Everett to jump onto the statue with his sledgehammer. Although it is true that Wesley Everett is responsible for the physical assault on the statue in Miss Hubbard, it was Whitney who controlled the sequence of events, pulling the strings of her puppet. Whitney never intervened when Britt Smithson encouraged violence during the video conference, in reference to achieving the planned goal of the organization. Whitney sent Everett a message saying, "You got to do what you got to do." The coded messages from Whitney became more specific the day before the protest, when Whitney sent Everett the message saying, "Ready to bring down the hammer tomorrow?" Although it was Britt Smithson who ultimately handed Everett the hammer at the protest, do you really believe it was a coincidence that Everett received that message the day prior and then had a hammer at her disposal? Whitney was manipulating his puppets, getting them ready to carry out desired actions through his cryptic commands. In addition to this, shortly after Wesley's arrest, both Britt Smithson and Tracy Whitney's computers were destroyed. Smithson was dropped in the river, and Whitney's conveniently erased. The defense's expert witness, Robin Hest, failed to include witness statements or events prior and during the protest when making his analysis. Hest believes that words should be interpreted for their common meaning, completely neglecting the clear internal language used within debunking myth story, of which you heard about from Detective Jaden Bramberg. The defense will try to lead you to believe that this was all an isolated incident, that it was a work of a passionate, lone wolf individual, Wesley Everett. However, Smithson's historical group did not even engage in action prior to becoming a DMIT chapter. In addition to this, similar incidents have happened before within DMIT. As you heard about from Detective Jaden Bramberg, the Australia chapter of Debunking Mystery held a protest that turned violent, resulting in the injury of a government worker. This sounds suspiciously similar to the protest we have been discussing. The common thread between these two orchestrated events is one individual, Tracy Whitney. If violent action has happened twice under the pretense of peaceful protest by DMIT, what's to say it won't happen again? The only way to stop this cycle of violence and criminal conspiracy is to find Tracy Whitney guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Let us review the counts in full. Count 1, malicious mischief in the first degree. The state has provided more than sufficient evidence that Tracy Whitney knowingly and maliciously provided encouragement, tactics, materials, and assistance that led to the $10,000 damage of the Altenbury statue. Count 2, criminal conspiracy. The state has proved that Tracy Whitney, Britt Smithson, and Wesley Everett agreed to violent action as a means to remove the statue, which is shown through the known call to action, energetic tango. This agreement resulted in Wesley Everett's assault of Del Hubbard and the statue. Count 3, assault in the second degree. As an accomplice, Tracy Whitney encouraged violence as a means to achieve the goal of statue removal, which is what led Wesley Everett to commit the assault of Del Hubbard, which has left Ms. Hubbard unable to complete her work. The state has the burden of proof, and we have met that burden. The evidence has shown that beyond a reasonable doubt, Tracy Whitney was the mastermind behind the DMIT protests and orchestrated the events, including the violence, by pulling the strings of his trained puppets. Members of the jury, do not let a puppet take the blame for all of the actions of the puppeteer, as Tracy Whitney in the defense will try to have you do. The state asks you to hold Tracy Whitney accountable and find him guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. And for defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Members of the jury, on September 16th, 2019, Wesley Everett picked up the cold, hard metal of that sledgehammer, and the statue of Altenbury came tumbling down, injuring an innocent bystander, Del Hubbard. Today, the prosecution had the burden of proving that Tracy Whitney was guilty of criminal conspiracy, and that he was an accomplice in malicious mischief in the first degree and assault in the second degree. The prosecution had to prove these things beyond a reasonable doubt. They have not done so. If the prosecution cannot prove that Tracy Whitney was an accomplice, then Tracy Whitney cannot be held responsible for the damages to the statue or to the injuries of Del Hubbard. In order to prove that Tracy Whitney was an accomplice, the prosecution would have had to prove jury instruction number 9, that he solicited, commanded, or encouraged Wesley Everett to commit the crime, or that he aided or agreed to aid Wesley Everett in the planning or committing of the crime. The prosecution paints the picture that Wesley Everett was a puppet and that Whitney was the puppet master. The fact of the matter is there were no strings being pulled here. Tracy Whitney did not command or encourage Wesley Everett to commit any crime, nor did he help or plan with Wesley Everett to commit these crimes. On September 16th, 2019, Wesley Everett went rogue. You've heard from Britt Smithson, who testified about Everett's extremist tendencies from the beginning, going on tangents during DMI meetings, to the point where DMI didn't even want to invite him to the meeting with Mayor Graham because of his tendency to get extremely aggressive. Even then, he had a potential to go rogue. Now, focusing on the day of the protest, you heard the prosecution say that Tracy Whitney appeared on a tablet screen and at full volume screamed a signal to Everett. But earlier today, you heard from the prosecution witness, Del Hubbard, that it was much too loud to hear the voice or voices on the device. And throughout everyone's testimonies, Wesley Everett was the only person who clearly heard the supposed signal, Wesley Everett was the only person who acted upon that signal, hitting the statue 3 times. Wesley Everett was the only person who acted violently that day. Wesley Everett went rogue. Britt Smithson, who Everett claims was his closest ally within this group, was shocked to see Everett climb up onto the statue. In fact, Aylin Strong testified as though it looked as it took him totally by surprise. But Britt's surprise did not come out of nowhere. It was initiated by Everett going rogue. Now, we've heard a lot about the things that Tracy Whitney wrote and said, but keep in mind that everyone in America has the right to free speech. Robert Hess, an expert in the workings of the First Amendment, clarified this for us. He told us about the Brandenburg test, the standard for determining what constitutes as free speech. In order for Whitney's statements to be considered free speech, there cannot be intent for imminent action. These actions cannot be imminent, and there cannot be a likelihood that these actions will occur. What we have seen over and over again throughout this case is that Tracy Whitney's words lacked that imminence. You can see this in Exhibit 3, the wanted posters, which the prosecution just said was proof that Whitney was dead set on creating violence. Alton Berry's statue taken down, by any means necessary. By any means necessary does not have a given timeline or a date. These events could be taking place in 18 years or in 2 seconds. No imminence, no conspiracy. The same is true of Exhibit number 4, the letter from Whitney to Merrill Graham, proposing the removal of the Alton Berry statue. This letter is far from being a threat, it's lawful advocacy. And while it does mention consequences, if you use the Brandenburg test, you can clearly see that these comments are not imminent because they have no real timeline of when they would be taking place. No imminence, no conspiracy. This is also shown in Exhibit number 2 on the DMI website. You also heard the prosecution say that the edited quotes from Thoreau and Gandhi were proof of Whitney's state of mind. But once again, this is just a general statement, no given timeline. No imminence, no conspiracy. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, much of the prosecution's case relies on Wesley Everett's testimony alone. But remember that Everett has pled guilty to 3 criminal charges. And the severity of those sentences for his charges will depend on this case. Jury instruction number 5 tells you that you should use great caution when considering any words from Wesley Everett. In fact, today, under oath, Miss Everett got impeached for making up statements that had never been addressed before. Members of the jury, the prosecution had a burden to meet. They needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Whitney was part of a conspiracy. And acting through Wesley Everett, he intentionally damaged the statue of Alton Berry and assaulted Del Hubbard. Since they have failed to show that Tracy Whitney was an accomplice, and since all of Tracy Whitney's words are protected speech, they have not met that burden. We are asking you, the jury, to return a verdict of not guilty on all charges.
Thank you. Any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense has, I'm sorry, Your Honor, may I begin?
Yes, please. Sorry, I interrupted you. My
No
apologies.
problem, Your Honor. I just, thank you. The defense has said that it would be much too loud for Wesley Everett to hear the call to action over the tablet. However, you heard Britt Smithson today in her cross say how during the call to action, when she heard Tracy Whitney's voice come over the loudspeaker, Wesley Everett was holding the tablet. I believe that you'd be able to hear it if you were holding it. In addition to this, the defense has mentioned that Britt Smithson seemed confused, according to Aylin Strong, after Wesley Everett jumped up onto the statue. However, you also heard Del Hubbard say that Britt Smithson was the one who handed Wesley Everett the hammer. Now, Aylin Strong was standing a far, far ways away and multitasking, doing many things at once. I doubt that his recollection is very sound, while Del Hubbard was standing at the base of the statue and had a clear view of Britt Smithson handing Wesley Everett the hammer. In addition to this, they said that Robin Hest Brandenburg test didn't show the imminence of threats. However, Robin Hest didn't take into account the events prior and during the protest. I can assure you that if these events were put into consideration during the Brandenburg test, the results would have been changed. For example, in exhibit number 5, when it says ready to bring down the hammer tomorrow, if Hest would have included the idea that during the protest a hammer was used, that the imminence of that threat would have been different. In addition to this, the impeachment that they were referring to was never finalized. In addition to this, they were referring to emails, which was never mentioned in her witness statement, and instead they should have brought up the emails and projected those onto the screen instead of the witness statement. In conclusion, I'm sorry, it's time. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Any rebuttal?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Okay. Nicely done. And I think that concludes. So I believe that the raters will be completing their ballots. Do the participants want some feedback while they're doing that?
I believe I would welcome any feedback you have.
Okay.
Your Honor, I believe according to the rules, we are not allowed to give feedback until all of the raters have submitted their ballot.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to say I need a minute because it was way too difficult to listen and do this at the same time. So
okay. And is it, I know we've got, I think we've got a staff quorum. Is it the fact that I can't do any feedback while the raters are finishing up?
It is, yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, do you guys know how funny it is to be sitting in your spare bedroom in your judicial robes?